All right, we're going to review the ethics of belief. We're going to spend just a bit of time on Clifford and a little more on James. So the central question of the ethics of belief is as follows. Can our beliefs be morally right or wrong? We know that actions can be morally right or wrong. And sometimes we do talk in terms of beliefs being rational or irrational, but can beliefs be morally evaluable? And if so, what makes a belief wrong rather than right? Clifford, a philosopher and mathematician, had a very simple and I think to some attractive answer to this question in his essay, The Ethics of Belief. And Clifford's argument for his answer, which I'll state in just a second, is built on specific cases of what we can think of as dangerous beliefs. So he gives this example. A ship owner was about to send to sea an emigrant ship. He knew that she was old and not over well built at the first, and that she had seen many seas and climes, and often had needed repairs. Doubts had been suggested to him that possibly she was not seaworthy. These doubts preyed upon his mind and made him unhappy. He thought that perhaps he ought to have her thoroughly overhauled and refitted, even though this should put him to great expense. In the first version of this case, after the ship owner has these doubts, Clifford describes the way in which he goes on to suppress his doubts, pay more attention to the evidence that supports what he wants to believe, and forms the belief, in all sincerity, that the ship is going to make it. It's seaworthy. He kind of puts his faith in the ship and also in Providence, that Providence wouldn't sink the ship with all these people. Tragically, though, the ship does sink in version 1, and all the people aboard die. Clifford expects that you'll have the same reaction he does, which is that the ship owner did something terribly wrong. Now, we can agree that the ship owner did something terribly wrong, but not be sure about what exactly he did wrong. The second version of the ship owner case is supposed to support Clifford's diagnosis of what the ship owner did wrong. Specifically, it's not just the bad consequences, the people actually dying in the first version of the case, that although that's bad, that's not the only source of wrongdoing here. It's also not the truth or falsity of the belief, or even the fact that the ship owner acted on his belief. Instead, Clifford says, what's wrong is that the ship owner believed something on insufficient evidence. And we can see this, so he says, by considering a second version of the ship owner case, a version in which the ship owner suppresses his doubts about the ship's seaworthiness just as before, sends the ship off just as he does in the first case, but in which through a stroke of good luck, the ship just happens to make it to the other side. Just like Captain Jack Sparrow here, right as the ship is sinking, he steps off. That's what happens in version 2. The families make it across. The question then is, in version 2, Clifford asked, is it morally wrong for the ship owner to believe that his ship was seaworthy in the second case, as well as in the first? And Clifford thinks you'll have no hesitation if you, in the first case, said the ship owner's believing that the ship was seaworthy was wrong. You'll say the same thing in the second case, too. The fact that he got lucky in the second case is just a matter of luck, not a matter of the moral status of what he did wrong, or right for that matter. Clifford says, what shall we say? We shall find him guilty of the death of those men, at least in the first case. But then he goes on to say, in the second case, where the ship does make it across and no one dies, there's no actual bad consequences, does this diminish his guilt? Not one jot, says Clifford. When an action is once done, it is right or wrong forever. No accidental failure of its good or evil fruits could possibly alter that. The man would not have been innocent. He would only have been not found out. So if Clifford's right about this, in the second case, even when there's no bad consequences to the action, that supports, to some extent, his diagnosis. Well, why was it wrong then? Clifford notes two things about two features of both of these versions of the shipowner case. One, this shipowner's belief is what we can call socially significant. It's a belief that's capable of affecting the welfare of other people. If you own a ship and your say-so is the thing that determines whether poor families who want to emigrate to another country are going to set sail on this dangerous journey on your ship, then your beliefs about whether the ship is seaworthy really matter to the lives of other people. Now, that can be fine. We can form socially significant beliefs and do so in a morally responsible way. But Clifford says what goes wrong in the shipowner case is that it's a socially significant belief that is based on insufficient evidence. And it's the combination of those things that leads Clifford to conclude it is always wrong everywhere for anyone to believe anything on insufficient evidence. So we can think of what Clifford has given us here as an argument for Clifford's rule, or CR, that principle. Clifford's argument has two premises. The first premise is that it's always wrong for anyone to form any socially significant belief upon insufficient evidence. Why think that? Well, consider shipowner version 1 and shipowner version 2. What else explains the moral wrongness in that case, except the fact that the shipowner held something that was socially significant but did so without sufficient evidence? That's his defense of that first claim. We gave something more detailed in class, but since this is just a review, that's the basic idea. Likewise, we went into more detail in class about how he defends CR2. We discussed belief-forming habits, individual and collective. The second premise, though, for our purposes today, is just the claim that every single belief is socially significant. And here Clifford thinks no belief can possibly be isolated from our broader habits of belief formation. And those habits themselves inevitably spill out into public and affect how other people believe, and so what other people do. So it follows that if it is always wrong for anyone to form any socially significant belief on insufficient evidence, and also that every single belief is socially significant, then it is always wrong for anyone to form any belief whatsoever on insufficient evidence. In other words, Clifford's rule is true. This is the passage that you can go to for the defense of the second premise. That's on your handout. I'm not going to go through it here. But here he claims that there's no belief is isolated, as I mentioned earlier. So this is, I think, probably one of the two places that Clifford's most vulnerable. In class, we had a good discussion about whether there could conceivably be beliefs that are just incapable of harming others. In other words, is it really true that every belief is socially significant? That would be a way of pushing back on that second premise.